Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm super excited to share with all of you part 3 of my favorite makeup products of 2021. So this video is especially exciting for me because it's about eye products. And if you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you know that eyeshadow especially is basically my favorite part of any makeup look. And so there were a ton of contenders for favorites from this year, but I did my best to narrow things down. I cheated a little bit here and there in that there are some honorable mentions, but hopefully this video is helpful for any of you who are curious what eye products really stood the test of time and made it to these year-end favorites. So without further ado, let's dive into these eye products. So to start off, I want to get some of the less fun, a little bit more boring, but staple products out of the way. So let's first talk about brow products. So I tried a lot of new eyebrow pencils this year, but by far my favorite was the Huda Beauty Balm Brows Brow Pencil. I have this in the shade Soft Black, and you can see that this is just the thinnest little eyebrow pencil ever. I find that this product is perfect for defining the perimeter of my brows, filling in any sparse areas, and just giving me a really nice defined brow look. Brows are definitely a part of my makeup routine I struggle a little bit with. I don't like spending a lot of time on my brows, so you're never gonna see me with really perfect Instagram brows. But I do feel like this brow product helps a lot in terms of upping my brow game and giving me a little bit more of a defined look. This is also a pretty waxy formula, so you're not going to have your brow pencil sort of smear or slide around. It does a really good job of just staying wherever you put it. After brow pencil, I like going in with a brow cream just to give my brow hairs a little bit more volume. And my favorite brow cream of the year was definitely the M Cosmetics brow cream. I have this in the shade Espresso, and you can see this has the thinnest little spoolie wand. Mine is unfortunately a little bit bent because I've used this so much, but I really love this product. It really fluffs out your brows, so it gives them both volume in terms of coating each hair and making them a bit thicker, but it also makes them a little bit fluffy, which I think is really great for a more natural brow look. It doesn't really make your brows look like they're just slicked back. On everyday no makeup days, I find this is perfect to use by itself. But on days like today when I'm doing a full glam look, I love pairing this with the Huda Beauty Balm Brows Brow Pencil, and together they just give really nice defined brows. Next up, for eye primer, this year I actually haven't used that many eye primers that I enjoy. For the most part, most days I'll just go in with concealer to prime my lids. And today, for example, I just used my Pat McGrath concealer in LM10 to prime my lids before going in with eyeshadow. In lieu of primer though, what I've been loving on days when I have more of a sparkly, bright eyeshadow look is to go in with mixing liquid. So my love of mixing mediums started because of you guys. You recommended on some of my Pat McGrath videos that I try out the Mehron mixing liquid, which is what Pat McGrath herself uses with her shadows. And I have loved this ever since I picked it up. It makes such a huge difference. It basically eliminates fallout and it allows your highly flaky, shimmery shades to just adhere to the lids, look really shiny and brilliant without any sorts of issues of creasing or flaking. And this is also brilliant if you want to do a winged liner with any of your powder eyeshadows. This basically makes them into a liquid shadow. A more recent addition to my collection though that has been a major game changer is this Pat McGrath IntensifEYES Artistry wand. So I do have a forthcoming video comparing this with the Mehron mixing liquid, and overall I would say I like the effect of the mixing liquid a little bit better. It's a little bit more versatile in terms of the different types of finishes you can get. But ever since I picked up this wand, I have been using it non-stop. So basically this wand is mixing liquid converted into a balm format and put into this triangular pen design. What makes this product so innovative is just that it's so easy to use. All you need is this pen. You just brush it quickly on your eyes after you've put down your matte shadows, and boom, you can just add any sort of flaky, chunky shade on top, and it really reduces the amount of fallout you have. It makes the shadows really adhere nicely. And unlike mixing liquid, you don't need to get a plate, you don't need to wet your brush. It's all just here. So I have really been loving this, and if you're like me and you're a little bit lazy about mixing liquid, then this is an excellent addition to your collection. That'll make it just so much easier to work with sparkly, chunky, flaky eyeshadows. The last staple products I wanted to mention were eyeliners. So first off, on my lids, I always use liquid eyeliner because mascara and I do not get along. I'm also terrible at putting on false eyelashes. So pretty much in all of my videos, I have on a cat eye using liquid eyeliner. And in almost all of my videos this year, that eyeliner has been the M Cosmetics brush liner in the shade brown. So this is my all-time favorite eyeliner, even though I have tried many eyeliners. I've tried the Kat Von D, the Stila, the Tom Ford, and a bunch of other classic eyeliners. But this is the one I keep going back to because it just has everything I'm looking for in an eyeliner. For one, it has a really nice long, thin brush tip that makes creating a cat eye really easy. The formula itself is not too liquidy, so it's not going to bleed or run into areas where you don't want it to go. But it's also not so dry that you have drag on your eyelids. It's in that perfect in-between. It's also buildable, which is really important to me because often I have a lot of shimmers on my eyes and I want my eyeliner to still be opaque on top of the shimmers. So I find that I can keep layering this on top of itself and it doesn't pick up any of the layers underneath. The finish of this is also comparatively matte. So it's not a completely matte finish. There definitely is a tiny hint of shine to it, but compared to say the Tom Ford eyeliner, this one is definitely more matte, which is my personal preference because I don't really like it when my eyeliner looks shiny. I want the eyeshadow to be where all the shine's at. Finally, the fact that this is brown is really great because I often find that black eyeliner can look a little bit harsh. As you can see from today's look, it still looks pretty black on the eyes, so it's not like it looks like a warm brown. It's definitely a really cool espresso black, but it's still just a little bit off from black such that it won't look as harsh as a black eyeliner. So I've been really loving this guy and I'm really impressed too. This has basically lasted me the whole year. I bought a backup for this halfway through the year because I thought for sure it would have run out by now, but it's actually still going strong. So highly recommend this eyeliner. For the waterline area though, I like going in with a gel pencil eyeliner. And my favorite one has been Black Coffee from Pat McGrath. So as you can see from this swatch here, this is a really easy to glide on and apply eyeliner. Definitely of all of the pencil eyeliners I have ever tried, this one is the smoothest and easiest to apply. And actually while I'm at it, why don't I also give you guys a swatch of this pen. So you can see they're kind of a similar color, really cool toned dark brown shades. And so what I love about this eye pencil is it really applies with no drag. This is the first eye pencil I've ever tried that truly has no drag on my lids or in my waterline area. Yet it still has really good staying power. So most days I just use this on my waterline, and as you can see today, I mean, I've had this look on now for like 3 or 4 hours. I've been talking to a camera this whole time and still it's lasted decently well on my waterline area. I normally go in with liquid liner on my lids, but this is also the only eye pencil that I am willing to use on my lid area. Usually they really drag and skip, but this one really applies like a dream and is so comfortable. It's obviously not as precise as the liquid eyeliner, but it's really great if you want a more smudged out eyeliner look. So with those staple eye area products out of the way, let's get to the stars of today's video, my favorite eyeshadows of 2021. So I'm going to start out with more natural, neutral, everyday eyeshadows and work my way towards the more colorful, shifty, sparkly formulas. So to start out, let's talk about the eyeshadow palette that surprisingly I used the most this year, which is the Charlotte Tilbury Star Aura palette. So as you can see here, this is a really basic, everyday, neutral eyeshadow palette with 4 shimmery shades. If you guys watched my initial impressions of this palette, you know that I was not super impressed. I thought it was a pretty palette, but kind of meh. Didn't really show up a ton on my lids. But that aspect of it ended up being my favorite aspect of this. So this is my go-to eyeshadow palette for professional occasions. So if I need to look good going to work, this is just a perfect eyeshadow palette that's super easy to apply. Because these are all Charlotte's Baked Gelée shimmer formulas, they really glide onto the lids and blend out super easily. Unlike with matte formulas, you don't have to worry about them catching at all. So first thing in the morning, if you are rushing to work, you can really quickly whip this onto your lids without having to be too precious about blending. And then the fact that none of these shades are that pigmented is perfect for the aesthetic I'm going for whenever I go to work. I don't want anything that's too glam, too smoky. This is a really great way to brighten up the eye area, give it a little bit of sparkle and contour, while not necessarily looking like you have a lot of eyeshadow on the lids. So this is a limited edition product. It's pretty hard to find this now. I think it's still available on Charlotte Tilbury's website. But if this does go out of stock at some point, I do think that the lighter of the 2 quads that she released for the holidays this year is quite similar to this. I watched a video where someone did a side-by-side comparison of the 2, and overall they come across pretty similarly on the lids. So you might want to look into that quad if this one ends up being sold out. But I really love this palette. It was a really surprise win for me as someone who typically doesn't like really neutral shades. Next up in the neutral camp, we have the Natasha Denona Glam Face palette in the light color story. So this guy was really surprising to me. I was originally not going to pick this up. It was, to me, one of the easiest passes from Natasha Denona for this whole year. It looked so boring in the promo pics. I figured, okay, I definitely have these shadows somewhere in my collection. So I was not originally going to pick this up, but it just so happened that this came out right around the Sephora VIB sale and it piqued my curiosity enough. I was like, fine, I'll pick it up and see if I like it. And I have completely fallen in love with this palette. So you'll see that most of the palettes I talk about today I've had for quite a while. This one has just like really shot up there in the favorites really rapidly. Even between the time when I filmed my video with this palette to now, my feelings about this palette have just gotten so much stronger. So this has basically become my favorite neutral everyday palette. It's so perfect in that you can use this similar to the Star Aura quad on days when you just want something super natural, very professional, no makeup. So on days like that, I go in with these 2 mattes and then I use this highlighter as an all over lid shade. And that is a gorgeous look. It's really barely perceptible makeup that still makes you look really nice, really awake, makes your eyes look bigger and brighter. So I love that look. But also, this is gorgeous if you want a glam look, but in a really neutral nude color story. Basically on those days, I'll amp it up with the smoke shade and then go in with these 2 shimmers. I can't say that I love this blush that much. It's fine, it's great, but I don't really like cream blushes that much. So I'm really ranking this based on the rest of the products which I use as eyeshadow. And I have just completely fallen in love with this palette. If you guys watched my full video review of this, I compared this with the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk quad and with a bunch of my other palettes. And I basically said that if you have like Pillow Talk or similar quads, you probably don't need this. I love this so much better than Pillow Talk. The undertones in this palette are so much more flattering for my skin tone. Pillow Talk often comes across a little bit orange on me. This is really a perfect true nude, true neutral palette on my skin tone. And so ever since I picked this up, even though I'm usually much more of a colorful eyeshadow wearer, I have really looked forward to every single time that I've gotten an opportunity to wear this palette. So if you've been looking for a neutral eyeshadow palette to add to your collection and you love being able to go from day to night looks, I would highly, highly recommend checking this out. Next up, another everyday friendly palette that I've been loving throughout 2021 and that has been one of my most used palettes of the year is the Natasha Denona Bronze Palette. So this actually came out in 2020, but I didn't get this until this year, so it's counting for this year's favorites. And I am absolutely in love with this palette. I did not expect to be so in love with this palette because when you look at it, it's pretty, but it's a little bit boring. There's a lot of bronzy tones, as the name implies. Essentially, other than these two shades over here, the rest of them are all in a very similar color story. And so when I first got this palette, I loved the first look I made from it, but I assumed I wouldn't play around with this palette a lot just because I usually like to create a lot of really different looks. I rarely like to go back and do the same look over and over again. But I love how because this palette has 15 shades, even though a lot of the shades look somewhat similar, you're still able to play around with the slight differences in undertone and finish to create a wide variety of different types of bronzy looks. Again, they probably don't look that different from each other, but they look different enough to still make it really fun to play around with this palette. And especially in the summertime, basically anytime I wasn't filming, if I wanted to do a glam makeup look, this was the palette that I would go into. And when I look back on the eyeshadow looks that I did this year, many of my favorite looks were with this palette. So if you like neutral to warm leaning shadows, if you like bronzy looks, I would highly, highly recommend checking out this palette. I think you'll have a lot of fun playing around with it. So now let's talk about our first runner-up in this sort of neutral everyday palette category. So here I have the Natasha Denona Retro palette. This is basically the cooler toned mauvey, rosy, lilac counterpart to the bronze palette. And this is a much more recent addition to my collection, which is part of why it hasn't made it to the favorites. I definitely need to play around with this palette a little bit more, so I can't really consider this a best of the year sort of eyeshadow palette for me. So far, I have really enjoyed playing around with this palette. It is a really nice counterpart to bronze on days when I instead want to go for something a little bit cooler toned. The formula in this palette is really great. Even the creamed powder mattes work really well. And you can do a wide variety of both sort of more peachy neutral looks with this part of the palette and also much more purpley plum looks with this side. That said, I don't think this is gonna knock bronze out of its place because that one, even though I normally don't even like really warm tone shades, somehow it has just completely stolen my heart. So moving right along, let's now talk about some of the slightly more colorful and sparkly eyeshadows that I've been loving this year. So first off, I have here all three of the Temptalia Sydney Grace Collab eyeshadow palettes. We have here Heart Dog, which is the more neutral, grungy of the three. Quintessence, which is the space-themed palette that has some dual chromes in it, and Radiant Reflection, the rainbow palette that ended up being my favorite of the three. So first off, I am a huge fan of Temptalia. I rely on her blog so much, and if you guys have been watching my videos for a while, you know that whenever brands do not provide official shade descriptions, I always go to Temptalia's website to try to find how she has described the shades so I can share that with all of you. Because Temptalia has so much knowledge of all the makeup on the market, I was really excited when she did this collab, and I've been really pleased with these eyeshadow palettes. This was my first time trying out Sydney Grace eyeshadows, and the quality was really impeccable. Each of these palettes full price is only $40, and I was actually able to get the bundle of 3 for only around $80 because there were a bunch of discounts and coupon codes. But even at full price at $40, it's an impeccable value just given how beautifully these eyeshadows blend and how shimmery and easy to apply the metallics are. First off, I have to say that Sydney Grace has the easiest to blend out mattes that I've ever tried. Even for these sorts of shades like the greens, the purples, and the blues that are really hard to formulate, their versions just blend out like a dream. So if you're someone who has a lot of issues with patchiness in your crease area, I would highly recommend trying out Sydney Grace shadows. The shimmers are also super beautiful, very creamy to the touch, very easy to apply, minimal fallout. And I think Temptalia just did an excellent job of curating these palettes. They have so many unique shades to them, and even though each of the palettes is very colorful, they still create really gorgeous, cohesive looks. When these first came out, every time I was traveling, I would just take one of these with me because with any one of these palettes, you can just create such a wide variety of different looks. Also, the cardboard packaging just makes these really lightweight and really slim, so really easy to carry around with you. I'm not sure how much longer Sydney Grace will stock this particular collab, so if you are interested in these palettes, I would highly recommend them. And if you want to see swatches and demos of all these shades, then definitely check out my video review for this release. Another one of my favorite palettes of the year that kind of straddles the neutral to colorful territory is the Pat McGrath Celestial Odyssey Holiday Palette. So this is one of her Mothership Megas, so it comes with 18 shades, so more shades than any of her other palettes, but this is still the impeccable Pat McGrath formula. So these sorts of palettes are not going to come with her Blitz Astral, Baked Gelée, very fancy formulas, but they will come with a lot of mattes and shimmers that are really, really beautiful. I think this is such a fun palette to play around with because you do have a ton of different neutral tones. In fact, most of this palette is more on the neutral pinky peachy side. But then you also have these really fun pops of color. So I especially love Citrine Envy down here and this bluish turquoise shade over here. So it's just a really fun palette to play around with, and especially if you're someone who mostly likes neutral tones but does like the occasional pop, then this is a great palette to check out and to be able to get the impeccable Pat McGrath formula for a much lower cost. In terms of comparing this palette with last year's palette, which was Celestial Divinity, I would say she definitely improved the packaging a lot. This is a much sturdier package than last year's. I will say color story wise though, I do prefer last year's a little bit better. It had the 2 Star Wars releases in it and then an additional 6 shades. And there were just a lot of dual chromes in that palette and a lot more colorful purpley tones. And so I do still prefer the shadows a bit more in that one, but I don't think you can buy Celestial Divinity anymore. So if you missed out on that, this is still a really wonderful palette to pick up. So since we're talking about Pat McGrath, it is probably no surprise to any of you who have been watching my channel for a while, but the Pat McGrath Huetopian Dream Mothership 9 palette was one of my favorite palettes of 2021. This is actually the palette that I have on my eyes today, and this was definitely for me my most highly anticipated makeup release for the entire year. I mean, just look at this box. It is so pretty. I love the rainbow, I love the pink, I love the purple. It just really appeals to my inner girly girl. And then the color story is really just the perfect Sailor Moon anime inspired color story of my childhood dreams. If you guys watched my really comprehensive swatch video with this palette, I compared it with 19 other palettes. This color story is actually very similar to the ColourPop Sailor Moon palette, and so you can definitely see the Sailor Moon inspiration in this color story. I mean, Pat McGrath also teased a lot of Sailor Moon clips when she came out with this, and so it all kind of coheres with that 90s superheroine vibe. So for today's look, I have this bright coral shade all over my crease. I deepened it up with this shade over here, and then I put the multi-chrome all over my lids and then scattered this shade all over that. In the inner corner, I have the golden bronze shade. For the brow bone, I have the skin show shade. For the lower lash line, I went in with these two mattes again, and then I went with this Cosmic Bloom shade on the inner 1/3. So I don't know that this is necessarily my favorite Pat McGrath palette ever. I need to at some point do a new Pat McGrath rankings video because since then I have gotten 3 more Pat McGrath palettes. But this definitely is at least in the upper third of my Pat McGrath palettes. This is basically Divine Rose 3, but it's a little bit less everyday friendly, I would say, than Divine Rose 1 or 2. These 3 shades at the bottom especially are extremely sparkly, and so she came out with her Artistry IntensifEYES wand at the same time as this release, and I think that was precisely because she knew if people tried just applying these 3 shades all over their lids without any mixing liquid, it would be disastrous. But for me, when I use this palette, oftentimes I actually don't use any mixing liquid. So for today's look, for instance, I only have concealer as primer, and I basically like using these shades as glitter toppers as well. So you can see that it's not an opaque layer of shine on my lids. So this palette is definitely still usable even if you're not going to use mixing liquid. But overall, this palette is just a lot of fun. I really enjoy playing around with it. It has a lot of cool special effects. So if you're curious about Pat McGrath Motherships, I would highly recommend looking into this one. So before we move on from Pat McGrath, I did want to briefly mention some runner-ups in the Pat McGrath Mothership category, because it just so happened that this year I basically bought all of the Pat McGrath Motherships, and so I would be remiss in not mentioning some of my other favorites. So I have here Midnight Sun, Subversive, and Bronze Seduction. So I'm not going to say a lot about those palettes here because, again, they're honorable mentions and I don't want to take up too much time in this video. But I have been really loving those 3 Mothership palettes as well. If you're interested in demos, reviews, swatches of those palettes, definitely check out my dedicated videos to those. But ever since I've had those in my collection, I've loved all the colorful, fun looks that I've been able to do with them. And whenever I'm not filming, I frequently find myself pulling out one of those palettes and doing a new look. So moving right along, now we're getting into the full-blown colorful eyeshadow section. Starting with the Natasha Denona Trio Chrome palette. So if you've ever felt that your eyeshadow collection does not have enough color in it, this is the palette to pick up. And if you guys watched my initial impressions of this palette, you might be surprised to see it here in the favorites, because when I first tried out this palette, I was a little bit underwhelmed by it, simply because the 3 trio chromes in the center are not that impressive. Like, I will swatch them right now for you guys, but as you can probably see from the swatches, they're really not that shimmery. I mean, they're fun shades if you want something that is a little bit more subdued. You don't really like super shiny multi-chromes. But for me, I do really like glitz and shine with most of my shadows. And so my first impression of this palette was that it was fine, but nothing to write home about. Since then though, as I have been getting into indie eyeshadows and a lot of really sparkly multi-chromatic shades, this palette has become my best friend. Essentially, this is the perfect palette if you want some beautiful, colorful mattes to set up a really gorgeous, show-stopping, multi-chromatic or shimmery eyeshadow. Natasha Denona did an excellent job of curating really unique matte shades that go with a wide variety of different looks. And so I just find this palette so special in my collection. I use it so much. I would say if you are not someone who wears a lot of colorful eyeshadows, if you don't have a lot of individual shadows you use, then you can definitely pass on this palette. But if you are someone who loves indie shadows, this is an excellent palette to use alongside them. And so I had to put this in my year-end favorites because I just use this palette so much nowadays. As a runner-up to Trio Chrome though, we have Circo Loco from Natasha Denona. This is also a really colorful palette, one that for some reason always looks terrible on camera, so trust me when I say it looks a lot better in person. But this is also a palette I love drawing from whenever I want to set up a colorful look with some fun mattes before going in with shimmers. The shimmers in this palette are definitely way higher impact than the ones in Trio Chrome, so this is also a good palette to use just by itself. But most of the time I do find myself drawing from this palette specifically for the mattes. Overall, I like the shades in Trio Chrome just a little bit better, but this is also a really fun addition to my collection this year. Alrighty, so we are now in the home stretch. So now let's talk about multi-chrome shadows. So this is the year that I finally tried out indie eyeshadows, and so I have to put Terra Moon's Chameleon shades in my best of 2021 eyeshadow favorites. These are the ones that really started my obsession with indie eyeshadows. They have such gorgeous shifts and shine to them. If you guys aren't familiar with Terra Moon's Chameleon formulas, it's basically like a hybrid between a multi-chrome and a more iridescent shimmery shade. As you can see here, they're just such gorgeous shades. Really, you can't find formulas like this from any of the larger brands. So, I mean, as much as I love Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona, these are just really shades that are on a completely different level. So this is part of why I've been loving Trio Chrome and Circo Loco so much. I mean, I basically go into those palettes for some mattes, and then one of these shades all over the lid just creates such a gorgeous look. Here, let me just give you guys a close-up of them. I mean, look at how fun these shadows are. Now you might be wondering, what about the other indie eyeshadows that I tried out this year? In particular, what about all of these Clionadh ones here? So I got these pretty late in the year. I actually still haven't gotten a chance to try all of them. So that's why I decided to go with the Terra Moons for my year-end favorites. But so far I have been loving these Clionadh ones so much, and I can't wait to continue playing around with them. Definitely stick around for my 2022 favorites to have more of a full showdown in terms of the different indie formulations. But for now, the Terra Moons are the ones that I have used the longest and can definitely vouch for. Another newcomer to the block that I quickly wanted to mention is this Adept Cosmetics palette. I just filmed my first impressions of this palette yesterday, and so I swatched all the shades, did a look with most of the shades, and I was extremely impressed with this palette. Again, this is not a year-end favorite because I've only used it once, but definitely stay tuned for more content about Adept Cosmetics. And the last honorable mention is this Danessa Myricks Lightwork 3 palette. Unfortunately, I don't think you can pick this up anymore, but if she ever re-releases this, this is an excellent palette with tons of fun multi-chromes and sparkly glittery toppers, and it's definitely the most adventurous palette that I've seen from a larger makeup brand. I mean, Danessa Myricks is not a huge makeup brand, but still way bigger than the indie eyeshadow brands that I just mentioned. The quality of this palette is impeccable. I love how liquidy the multi-chromes are. They glide onto the skin super seamlessly, have really brilliant shifts to them. And then these toppers in the center are so beautiful on the lids. They just add a really nice shine and shift to wherever you apply them on the eye area. You can also use these as cheekbone highlight. They are a little bit flaky and chunky for that, but if you want something with like a green shift, a blue shift, these will really have you covered. So that's it for my favorite eye products of 2021. I know there were a ton of products I ran through in today's video, but there were a lot more products that I tried out this year. So believe it or not, this is very much a curated list of my most favorite products. I would love to hear down in the comments below what your favorite eye products have been for this year. And if you've tried out any of the products I mentioned, I would love to hear what your thoughts about them were. Thank you all so much for joining me today. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. There will be one more Best of 2021 makeup video coming up, one about lip products, so definitely stay tuned for that. And if you haven't checked out part 1 and part 2 around base products and cheek products, definitely check out those videos as well. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!